Why is it so important when it comes to the right to vote for all Americans?
Because, like you said in your intro, this decision makes it harder to bring cases to the Supreme Court or to bring to courts in general to say this gerrymander was done on a racial basis. Justice Alito is of the opinion that it is almost impossible to separate race from politics when determining why a district has been drawn up that way. This is only really possible because of the Shelby decision that Chief Justice John Roberts authored, gutting the Voting Rights Act, which made it so that states like South Carolina, which were previously under pre-qualification, had to go to the Department of Justice to get approval for their districts when they were redrawn to say this is why this is not a racial gerrymander and get approved for them. In destroying that standard, the door opened to Alito being able to say, look, there's no real way to tell if this was racial or partisan. And in doing so, makes it so much harder for these cases to be brought forward and prove that Black Americans are being disenfranchised in this way.
Charles, what do you think of this from a legal standpoint?
From a legal standpoint, I think they have opened the door to this happening across the country in a number of different jurisdictions. To tether race and politics in the way that they have, in such a way that they are virtually inseparable, according to Alito, allows other districts who are watching this, other jurisdictions, to do the exact same thing. I think that for the standpoint of the Supreme Court making that decision, it's going to be sound until they change their mind. The Supreme Court is not right because they're not last because they're always right. They're right because they're always last. I say that very often. And because they have the final say, from a legal standpoint, it's going to stand until you have definitive proof that certain decisions are going to be made on the lines of race and not political party. So it's deeply problematic and has significantly larger implications.
Peter, we know the president cares a lot about voting rights, but we have not heard about them much on the campaign trail. Where do they stand in terms of his priorities?
Well, I think it's a high priority of his, but of course he's been frustrated from passing legislation in the Senate where the filibuster remains in place. They chose not to try to eliminate the filibuster because they didn't have the votes. I think enough Democrats were wary about getting rid of the filibuster because it's a useful thing when they're in the minority, right? So that's something that you have to look at. Again, my guess is after this election, that's one thing you hear the White House talk about. Can they make another effort at getting rid of the filibuster and passing a federal Voting Rights Act? But without that, they're not going to be able to do it. So you don't hear the president talk as much about it today as he did, say, a few years ago when he made a big issue of it. And that may, in fact, help explain in part why he has had some political trouble in terms of rallying Black voters back to him, according to the polls. Polls show that there's some frustration on the part of many voters that he hasn't followed through on promises on voting rights, even though, of course, that's because he doesn't have the votes to do it. That's the problem, of course. It's a sort of a circle in that regard. But you heard him talk a little bit about it today. You'll hear him presumably talk about it a little bit in the days to come, but it has not been a major theme so far yet in this campaign.
Hayes, practically speaking, do you believe the Biden-Harris campaign is making a mistake not campaigning harder on voting rights?
I do. I think that from one standpoint, it makes sense to go hard on this because of this centrality of democracy to President Biden's election pitch. He's arguing that if Donald Trump is reelected, he's a threat to democracy. What is the opposite of that, though? It is enabling voting rights. It's putting the power in the hands of the American people. And given how much distrust there is over the elections, in no small part thanks to Donald Trump, you see in polling that people on both sides are worried about whether the election will be fair, whether it will be upheld. And I think for President Biden and Vice President Harris to go out there and say, look, we know that it is important to vote. We want you to be able to vote. We want everyone to be able to vote fairly. That is what we are about. It is the other side that wants to pretend like fake people are voting, who want to pretend.
Pretend. Yes. They're not legitimate.
Yes.
No one on the right is legitimately concerned about voter fraud. And this argument about, maybe not accepting the election results is all nonsense, where they're bowing at the altar of Donald Trump, who won't accept true results. Charles, can we talk about Justice Alito? What is your reaction to this issue? Reports of these flags in his home, now in his vacation home, especially on a day when he wrote such a significant opinion?
There's an old football coach, I believe it was Lovie Smith, who once said at a press conference, they are exactly who we thought they were. Samuel Alito is exactly who we thought he was, and you don't need flags to make that decision or come to that conclusion. You can look at his words, you can look at his decisions, you can look at his opinions, South Carolina being one of them. The fact that there is no congressionally imposed code of ethics on the Supreme Court means nothing because they're going to do what they're going to do. And for as much as I respect and admire Hakeem Jeffries, at the end of the day, if this is a priority, you don't need further violations. We've seen enough. We've had so much conversation about Supreme Court justices.
Even if they give him an ethics code violation, it doesn't mean anything, Charles.
Correct.
So Hakeem Jeffries can stand up there and say that and say, like, if you do this one more time, we're coming for you. They can't come for them. Right? These Supreme Court justices have a lifetime appointment. OK, if I knew I had this job for the rest of my life, I would do it in my pajamas. I wouldn't look at ratings, and I wouldn't even read a single word. They have no motivation. It doesn't matter if the country doesn't trust them or like them. They've got those jobs forever.
Which is exactly why the notion of these flags, while they may seem to be exposing and enlightening for some people, do not surprise me, and they don't make a difference because it doesn't change anything about Samuel Alito and how he's going to do his job or the ways in which he is compelled to do his job, because he doesn't have to recuse himself from the cases involving January 6ers. He doesn't have to recuse himself from Donald Trump's immunity case. So ultimately, these are just flags blowing in the wind, and that's what I mean.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
Peter, we have been here before with Clarence Thomas. It is highly unlikely that Alito will recuse himself. And let's be honest, there does not seem to be real political will to impose ethics reform. And even if there is ethics reform, they're not losing their jobs. So where does that put us going forward?
No, I mean, they're not. They have the choice to decide how they comply with ethics, and other than impeachment, which is a rather extreme remedy, there's nothing really that any other branch of Congress any other branch of the government can do about it. What's fascinating about it, of course, is what Justice Alito is talking about in today's decision about keeping the court out of what are essentially political decisions. He said the districting decisions are political decisions by political bodies, and courts, don't really have much of a role in it. And yet the problem, of course, is the appearance of politics on the court. So the 6-3 decision today was broken down very clearly along party lines, if you want to look at it that way. The 6 justices who were appointed by Republicans voted in the majority. The 3 who were appointed by Democrats voted in the minority. And increasingly, you see polls showing, public sense that justices and judges at lower courts are themselves partisan actors, not neutral arbiters of law. Now, that's always been the case, but if the faith in the system increasingly is seen through that partisan lens, a political lens, it becomes harder to maintain the credibility and the faith in the system.
But what does it matter, Hayes, not to be a total cynic, if we don't have faith in our Supreme Court, right? They still have, to Charles's first point tonight, the last word. Does it actually matter? We could sit here and say, polling shows that the American people have no faith in the Supreme Court. Do any of them care?
I mean, here's the thing that is hard to wrap your head around. It's the idea that the Supreme Court makes decisions. It's up to the executive to enforce them. Like, no one is calling for President Biden to ignore Supreme Court decisions because that is a constitutional crisis that nobody wants. But I feel like the justices know that. And I think that's part of the problem here, is that they are aware that short of impeachment, like Peter said, there is no way to get them off of the bench until they die. They have the last word. So, but they are counting on the executive to fulfill their constitutional duty and uphold the law as the Supreme Court has interpreted it. So knowing that, they are just willing to completely flout any sort of impartiality that they should be having in these decisions and do what they want. So yeah, I hear your point about them just kind of running ramshot. That is kind of what they're doing. Yeah, unless and until they make a decision that is so egregious that it is impossible for a president to be able to stand up and say, I will enforce this. That is where we're going with this, especially with a Congress that is unwilling to legislate, to actually put forward rules that say, like, if they did put forward an ethics standard and said explicitly to violate it is grounds for impeachment, that is grounds for removal. Without that willingness to actually step up and be a co-equal branch, we're not going to move forward.